Welcome back to the deep dive. We often look at these epic stories, these foundational narratives from, say, the Bible as sort of straightforward accounts. God does this, people react, things happen.
You're right, a linear progression.
Exactly.
Right.
But what if we stepped way back? What if we look at the whole saga from Abraham right through to the Exodus from Egypt, not just as history, but as like a really long, drawn-out game of cosmic chess?
That's precisely the angle our source material takes for this analysis. It's framing this entire period, the very formation of Israel, as a highly detailed spiritual war.
Okay, so not just human actions, but supernatural strategy.
Absolutely. We're talking about tracking the enemy's strategy, the incredible timing involved, and this really high-stakes conflict aimed at disrupting one specific divine family line.
And the time frame involved is just massive. Our source points out that, back when the Great Pyramids were being built, the Fourth Dynasty, Israel as a nation didn't even exist yet?
Not even close. Moses wouldn't show up for centuries, maybe around the 19th dynasty. But the claim is that the spiritual adversary, Lucifer, according to the source, started planning way back then.
Why so early?
Because the promise had already been made to Abraham that his descendants would be this huge nation, like the stars, and that through his line, all families on earth would eventually be blessed.
So that promise itself put a target on that lineage.
It focused the enemy's attention immediately. That descendant, the ultimate future threat, had to come from this specific line. So the game, this spiritual chess match, kicked off long before Abraham's kids had any clue about the kind of pressure they were under.
Okay, so our mission here is to really dig into that, to unpack every strategic layer the source attributes to this ancient conflict.
That's the plan.
All right, so part one. How did the enemy even know who to target? Was it just guesswork, like maybe this family?
No, not according to this analysis. It wasn't random. It was about recognizing something specific. The sources call the spiritual seal.
A spiritual seal. What is that exactly?
Think of it as a kind of indelible spiritual mark, or maybe like a high-level pattern that the spiritual kingdom could recognize.
Okay.
Lucifer, the source claims, identified this pattern, the selo is the term used, and noted it was the same pattern seen way back on Noah.
Noah. So this seal indicated a chosen lineage.
Precisely. It basically told the enemy, okay, the Lord of Hosts isn't just winging it here. The moment they saw that mark on Abraham, apparently the spiritual alarm bells just went off.
And the plan became, stop this line.
Eliminate the bloodline. That became the immediate goal.
And their first big problem, spanning like several generations, was that they just couldn't stop the key births, right? Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel.
Exactly. That was a huge frustration for them. The source points to these supernatural conceptions, Sarah being elderly, Rebecca and Rachel being barren, as proof that the covenant was operating outside the normal rules.
So natural obstacles just weren't working.
Right. It showed the promise was, inviolable on that level. It couldn't interfere directly with the conception part, so if you can't stop them from being born...
You have to pivot. You have to destroy them once they're alive.
Exactly. They had to change their whole strategy.
Which brings the focus squarely onto Jacob, Isaac's younger son, who clearly gets this spiritual seal passed down to him.
Yes. And this is where the source gets into some really interesting character analysis. The adversary supposedly zeroed right in on what they saw as Jacob's main personality flaw, or maybe vulnerability.
Which was?
His shrewdness. The source uses a term like espertino, meaning clever, maybe a bit cunning, tricky even.
Okay. Not exactly a straightforward guy sometimes.
Right. And the enemy apparently saw this trait, this cleverness, as the perfect weak point, the ideal handle to grab onto to try and cause destruction within the family itself.
Like turn his own nature against the plan?
Sort of. The thinking described is we've got to reroute this guy before he actually establishes this nation that's going to be a disaster for us.
So strategy number one for Jacob.
Right.
Fratricide. Get the older brother Esau to kill him.
Correct. A direct repeat of the Cain and Abel pattern. Stop the lineage through murder within the family.
And the source details how they allegedly used the family tension. Rebecca pushing Jacob for the blessing.
Meticulously. That whole drama, Rebecca manipulating Isaac, Jacob going along with it, Esau's rage. The source frames that not just as family dysfunction, but as the precise mechanism the enemy exploited.
Weaponizing their flaws.
Exactly. The strife, the envy, the betrayal, it was all supposedly stirred up and amplified to push Esau towards murder, like a planned psychological attack.
But then there's this twist. The thing the enemy seemingly engineered, Jacob having to flee for his life, actually ends up saving him.
That's the classic counter move in this whole chess game narrative, isn't it? What Lucifer supposedly intended as the path to Jacob's death. God apparently uses as a 20-year training program.
And time working for Laban.
Right. Those years away where Jacob gets tricked, humiliated, deceived by Laban. The source argues those were absolutely essential, necessary to, lapidar is the word used.
Lapidar, like polishing a rough stone.
Exactly. To refine him, smooth out those rough edges. That period turned the enemy's intended curse into the very preparation, the humility Jacob needed to actually become Israel, the father of the nation.
Which leads us to that really famous wrestling match at the Jabbok River. He's heading back to face Esau, but first.
He has that intense all-night struggle, and the source identifies his opponent not just as an angel, but as a theophany, an appearance of God himself.
Oh.
And that struggle is Jacob's turning point. He holds on, he seems to genuinely repent of his old scheming ways, and his name gets changed to Israel. And crucially, the source points to the physical marking the injury to his hip.
The limp.
Yes. That marked hip was the permanent physical sign that his whole path in life was changed forever. He wasn't just passively carrying the seal anymore, he was actively transformed, restored.
And he survives the reunion with Esau. He returns, family growing.
Triumphant against the odds. Round 1 goes to Jacob, essentially.
So the enemy, checkmated on that move, has to immediately shift focus again to the next generation. The one where the seal now clearly rests.
Joseph.
Okay, so part 2. Joseph and the tactical use of Egypt.
Right. The enemy had to move fast now.
Right.
Joseph's spiritual seal was identified pretty quickly.
How? Was it obvious?
The source speculates maybe it was his dream telling, which he wasn't exactly shy about sharing, or maybe just Jacob's blatant favoritism making him stand out. Either way, he became the focus.
And the enemy strategy this time. Immediate and quite aggressive.
Destroy him, but not just kill him anywhere. This time, the strategy involved deployment. Move the target to the best possible place for destruction.
And that place was?
Egypt. The source is very clear on this. Egypt was considered the prime territory for the spiritual kingdom, the place where Lucifer and his associated entities reigned with more freedom than anywhere else on earth.
So if you want to guarantee destruction, send him there.
That was the thinking. Egypt was the optimal ground for the kill.
So they just needed a way to get him there. And again, they looked inside the family.
Found the same old weaknesses. The brothers' jealousy, their pride, that deep-seated envy. It's that Cain frequency again.
It's chilling how that pattern repeats in this narrative.
It really is. And the source emphasizes this wasn't just a crime of passion, it was premeditated. Selling their 17-year-old brother into slavery. Calculated malice.
And that act gets Joseph exactly where the enemy wanted him. Into the heart of Egypt.
Mission accomplished, from their perspective. He's delivered into the kingdom of darkness.
But then, things go wrong for the enemy. Again, Joseph, the slave, starts succeeding.
Dramatically. He ends up in Potiphar's house, and instead of being crushed, he rises, becomes head of the entire household. You can almost sense the enemy's reaction, like,
wait, what? This isn't right.
Exactly. The source basically paraphrases their reaction as intense frustration. Maske droga, droga, droga. Which translates roughly to, what the heck, darn it, this wasn't the plan. God was clearly protecting Joseph even there.
So, plan B. Pivot again. The trap with Potiphar's wife.
A classic tactic. Use sexual temptation or accusation. The goal was still the same ultimately. Get Joseph killed. Maybe executed for assault.
But even that doesn't fully work. He avoids the act itself, but ends up accused anyway.
Right. And by another, intervention or twist of fate, he doesn't get executed. He just gets thrown into prison.
So, containment achieved, maybe. The enemy thinks, okay, he'll just rot in there.
That seems to be the assumption. He'll die there eventually. But once again, the narrative flips it. The prison time becomes more preparation.
More lapidar.
Exactly. The source suggests Joseph needed that time to really deepen his humility, his total reliance on God, before he could handle the immense power that was coming.
It's a recurring theme, isn't it? The enemy's traps becoming God's training ground.
It's central to this interpretation. The prison was just another crucible.
And then the ultimate reversal. He gets out of prison, interprets Pharaoh's dreams.
And boom, at age 30, he's suddenly governor of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. This, according to the source, caused complete surprise and indignation in the spiritual realm.
they lost control.
Reportedly, a high-level alliance supporting Lucifer, referred to as the Brotherhood, admitted they had momentarily lost complete control of the situation. Their prime target was now effectively running the country they sent him to for destruction.
Which leads to this fascinating strategic puzzle about the 7 years of famine that followed Joseph's rise. The source actually presents a debate here.
Yes, this is a really interesting point for analysis. You have to ask, who orchestrated the famine? Was it God, bringing about the conditions to force Jacob's family down into Egypt, fulfilling that old prophecy to Abraham, making sure the nation actually formed there?
Or option B.
Or was it Satan? Hoping that Joseph, after everything he'd suffered, would be so full of bitterness and, desire for revenge that he'd refuse to help his brothers when they showed up desperate for food.
Letting them starve, effectively ending the lineage that way.
Precisely. It puts Joseph in this incredibly high-stakes position, not just politically, but spiritually and emotionally.
And the source emphasizes the human drama of it. It says Joseph actually failed in the first attempt to truly forgive.
Which makes sense, doesn't it? The psychological trauma was immense. Ripped from home, slavery, prison, all because of their hatred. Forgiving that genuinely wouldn't be easy. It took real internal work.
It was only on the second try, that really dramatic reveal, that he managed it.
And that moment of genuine forgiveness wasn't just personal for Joseph. In this framework, it was a massive strategic victory for God's plan.
And the result for the enemy's plan. Utterly devastating.
Completely. 70 people, the carriers of the seal, the undesirables from the enemy's perspective, are saved. Not just saved, but settled in Goshen, the best land in Egypt, protected by the very regime the enemy wanted to use against them.
I start multiplying.
Wow.
Rapidly.
Setting the stage for the next, even bigger phase of the conflict, and this time the enemy felt they were running out of time.
Okay, part 3. The Egyptian preparation. High magic and this concept of a time key.
Right. With the Israelites flourishing in Goshen, the source says the enemy felt extreme urgency. Lucifer had to run, basically, because that 400-year clock was ticking.
The 400 years mentioned to Abraham, Genesis 15, the time they'd be strangers in a land not their own?
Exactly. That time frame, nearing its end, signaled one thing with certainty: the birth of a liberator. Someone was coming who would challenge Egypt's power over them.
And this is where the source gets really specific, almost technical,
Yeah.
about how the enemy prepared this time key.
Yes, the Shavda Tempo. This wasn't just a vague feeling. The source claims it was actual knowledge derived from meticulously observing spiritual and celestial patterns connected to this lineage, connected to the spiritual seal.
So they could predict when someone important would arrive.
They believed they could. They might not have known who it would be, but they thought they had near certainty about the timing. Based on complex numerological and astrological calculations tied to the patterns they'd observed over generations, they could nail down the when, even if the who was unknown.
Okay, so if you know when your opponent's key piece is about to arrive on the board, you prepare the board.
You prepare intensively. And that's what the source claims happened. Lucifer had to make a massive, immediate investment in, high magic and strengthening alliances. This was an all-out effort.
Alliances with who? Or what?
With what the source calls territorial spirits. These are depicted as demonic entities holding sway over specific geographical regions like Egypt. And crucially, the claim is that Lucifer revealed his own intimate secrets directly to the pharaohs and the highest levels of the Egyptian priesthood.
Why? To give them power.
Exactly. To give them the supernatural power needed to try and stop Israel's growth and ultimately to defeat the coming liberator. He needed human partners armed with extraordinary occult abilities.
And the source lists specific secrets. This wasn't vague power?
No, it gets quite detailed. The list includes things like advanced astrological maps for predicting events, the mechanics of the time key itself, the true spiritual purpose and dimensions of the pyramids.
More than just tombs.
Far more, according to this source. They were seen as massive stone symbols, almost like batteries or focusing points consecrated to the adversary. Also revealed were rites and ceremonies for opening dimensional windows or portals.
Portals. Like gateways.
That's the claim, along with their specific geographical locations in Egypt, plus advanced numerology and the methods for making powerful magical potions and ointments.
Let's pause on the potions. The source mentions serpents specifically, right?
Right.
Why the focus on snake venom?
Yeah, it makes a point of distinguishing this from just, regular medicine of the time, which did use venom. The source claims specialists were harvesting specific types of serpent venom out in the deserts purely for magical use.
For what purpose?
When mixed with certain very specific herbs, the claim is this venom acted as a powerful hallucinogen. It supposedly caused states of torpor, altered consciousness, and even produced physical changes, affecting the central nervous system and metabolism.
Wow. So this is presented as like tangible evidence of advanced magic.
Yeah.
Using biochemistry to open priest up to spiritual influence.
That's exactly how the source frames it. It wasn't just chanting, it was manipulating physical and mental states to enhance their connection to the spiritual realm, getting them battle ready for the liberator's arrival.
So they're fortifying their spiritual defenses based on this time key prediction.
Preparing the battleground, strengthening their grip before that 400-year deadline hit.
All right, part 4. The final strategy, eliminate the liberator. The clock's run out.
The Israelites are now numerous, maybe even outnumbering the Egyptians, according to the source. So step 1 was neutralizing them as a potential force. Transformation.
Into slaves.
Right. Render them totally inoperable. Crush their spirit. Keep them busy with brutal labor. If they're just focused on survival, they can't be a spiritual threat.
But slavery was just containment. The time key still pointed to the liberator being born.
Correct. Containment wasn't enough to stop the prophecy. So the next step had to be more drastic: infanticide. A decree to kill the male Hebrew babies.
And this needed a pharaoh who was fully on board with this level of evil.
Yes. The source even suggests that potentially less cooperative pharaohs, maybe figures like Akhenaten or Tutankhamun, had recently died or been removed, clearing the path for a ruler who would enact such a horrific plan.
A collaborator.
A willing collaborator. And the timing, again, is stressed as being incredibly precise.
The infanticide decree didn't just happen randomly.
According to the source, absolutely not. It claims the mass killing started exactly when Moses was due to be born. It wasn't a panicked guess, a shot in the dark. It was targeted based on their calculations.
And this precision, the source argues, is the ultimate proof of the time key's accuracy.
That's the argument. It showed their predictive power, derived from all that astrological and numerological analysis. They believed a sealed one was arriving right then, and the plan was to cut him off before he could even grow up.
Okay, now this brings up a complicated historical question, which the source actually tries to tackle. The timeline of the pharaohs.
Right. It gets tricky. The source generally aligns with the view that Moses and Ramses II were contemporaries, maybe even grew up together in the palace as friends or rivals, and that Ramses II was the pharaoh of the Exodus itself when Moses comes back at age 80.
But Ramses II couldn't have been the pharaoh ordering the infanticide 80 years earlier.
Logically, no. That decree happened much earlier, around 1307 BC, based on the source's timeline. So who does the source point to for that atrocity? Tentatively, it attributes the decree to Ramses I, and it notes something interesting. Ramses I had a very short reign, strangely, only about a year.
And the source speculates why.
It suggests maybe the short reign was actually God intervening swiftly, removing the collaborator who started the killing, perhaps creating enough chaos during the transition of power that it allowed baby Moses to be saved by Pharaoh's daughter. The battle was already happening behind the curtains.
That's quite a scenario.
Yeah.
And then, jumping forward again after the Exodus, there's another strategic move related to narrative. The Merneptah Stele.
Ah, yes, the famous inscription from Ramses II's successor, Merneptah. It boasts about various victories and includes that line, "Israel is laid waste, its seed is no more."
Which was obviously not true.
Completely false. But the source offers a fascinating interpretation. It suggests this lie, claiming Israel was totally destroyed, might have been a strategic suggestion from the spiritual forces, from the Brotherhood.
Why lie like that in stone?
To control the narrative. To try and erase the memory of the huge, humiliating defeat they had actually suffered during the Exodus. Since mainstream history often doesn't dwell on the Exodus details, this inscription was the enemy's attempt to rewrite the story, claim victory, and psychologically demoralize any remnants or future generations.
So even after losing the battle, try to win the information war.
Exactly. And this ties back to Ramses II himself. All those colossal building projects, Karnak, Abu Simbel, the Ramesseum.
The sheer scale is unbelievable.
And the source argues it wasn't just about political power or ego, it was a deliberate spiritual intimidation tactic. designed to create such overwhelming splendor and magnificence that it would crush the spirit of anyone who dared challenge Egypt, especially the prophesied liberator if he ever returned.
Like, how could one man stand against this?
Precisely. Imagine Moses coming back as an 80-year-old shepherd after decades in the desert and facing that. Structures deliberately designed to make you feel insignificant.
The source uses that image of the Karnak hypostyle hall.
Feeling like an insect in a rock forest, or Abu Simbel carved directly into the mountain. These weren't just buildings, they were statements of immense power, saturated with occult symbolism, reinforcing the idea that Pharaoh and Egypt were unbeatable, both physically and spiritually.
Setting the stage for the ultimate confrontation.
Creating the perfect adversary in the perfect intimidating setting.
And then Moses does return, after fleeing 40 years earlier when he killed the Egyptian. That must have been a shock to the spiritual kingdom.
A huge shock. The source suggests that it was only when Moses fled that they finally realized, wait a minute, the sealed one was here among us for 40 years, learning their culture, their knowledge, maybe even their secrets.
And they just assumed he'd die out in the wilderness?
Right. They probably wrote him off. But then he comes back, ready to confront Ramses II, the very embodiment of the power they had spent centuries building up.
Okay, part 5. The confrontation itself and bringing it all together.
The source is really emphatic here. It claims the spiritual war in Egypt was unique, more intense on a supernatural level than anything seen even in Babylon or Rome later on.
Why more intense than Rome? Roman persecution was horrific.
It was horrific, yes, but the source distinguishes it. Roman emperors, while certainly instruments of evil, didn't have that same deep initiated alliance with the high-level spiritual powers. They weren't consecrated as sons of the fire like the Egyptian pharaohs and high priests supposedly were.
So Rome wielded human political evil, but Egypt wielded that, plus advanced high magic.
Yeah. That's the core distinction made. Egypt represented a fusion of immense political power and deeply ingrained, practiced occult knowledge received directly from the adversary, according to this view. It was a war involving supernatural powers in a way other conflicts weren't.
Which made Ramses II the perfect opponent.
Strategically chosen, the source argues. His status as a living god, a son of the fire, his immense pride, his personal involvement in the secret rituals, it all made him the ideal human vessel for the spiritual opposition. This was set up to be a direct head-to-head clash of spiritual authorities.
So the plagues weren't just random disasters. How does the source frame the spiritual victory? It wasn't just one event, was it?
No, it was a systematic dismantling. The source claims that Moses, through God's power, had to defeat a specific hierarchy of spiritual entities before the final victory. It mentions defeating 9 specific principates, 4 great princes, and 5 powerful subordinate ones.
And the plagues targeted these.
That's the interpretation. Each plague was a direct assault on one of these ruling entities and the domain it controlled in Egypt. The Nile, the land, creatures, the livestock, the sun, health, institutions. It was a strategic takedown of this spiritual command structure.
That adds a whole different layer to the sequence of the 10 plagues.
It does, and there's another really provocative detail. The source claims Satan had already opened 10 specific dimensional windows or portals in Egypt.
10 portals? Why 10?
The number is significant, and the source explicitly links this idea, these 10 access points for increased spiritual influence, to patterns it sees related to end times governments and control structures. It implies the strategy field-tested in Egypt is a blueprint for future global spiritual conflict.
Wow. Okay. Which makes the final plague, the death of the firstborn, even more significant. It hit Pharaoh directly, hitting the God King.
Yes. Pharaoh's own son died, and Pharaoh was seen as a god, the source of life for Egypt. So God's action here, according to the source, was the ultimate theological statement.
What was the statement?
Basically, you think you're a god. You call yourself a son of the fire, fine, but you don't control life. You cannot give life. It was the final, crushing demonstration of God's supreme authority over existence, humiliating Pharaoh and the spiritual power behind him.
And the source draws a direct line from that ancient strategy to today.
It does. It argues that the core strategy used in Egypt containment, making the people inoperable, is still the primary approach of the spiritual adversary today.
How so?
The argument is that the brotherhood, this high-level spiritual opposition, is perfectly fine with churches growing or God's people existing in large numbers as long as they are ineffective, as long as they're quiet, submissive, not making waves, and basically ignorant of the real spiritual battle happened.
Just like the Israelites when they were slaves.
Yeah.
Present, numerous, but totally contained and neutralized by the system.
Exactly. The enemy couldn't stop the nation from existing, couldn't stop the births, but they could try to stop them from being a functional, spiritually potent threat, make them inoperable.
But the source also circles back to why the Exodus did succeed, despite all that preparation.
Yes, despite the centuries of strategy, the magic, the alliances, the victory happened because in Moses you had the right person in the right time doing the right thing. Divine alignment and obedience trumped the enemy's meticulous planning.
But it wasn't the end of the war. Not by a long shot.
Definitely not. The source is quick to remind us that even after that massive victory at the Red Sea, Satan scored major wins almost immediately afterward.
Like what?
Well, corrupting the spies sent into the Promised Land, leading to that 40 years of wandering. Then the golden calf incident, pure idolatry, a practice the source says they picked up directly from Egypt.
So the contamination lingered.
Deeply. And later you see the kingdom dividing, prophets being ignored or killed, and eventually Israel losing its sovereignty altogether and ultimately rejecting the Messiah when he arrived under Roman rule. The Exodus was a monumental battle, but the war continued, adapting its tactics across millennia.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. We've gone through this deep dive, looked at this source's strategic analysis of spiritual warfare across centuries. The enemy relying on pattern recognition, that spiritual seal, the precision timing with the time key, leveraging high magic, venom, portals, all aimed at control.
And the key takeaway from this perspective is that the enemy's long game, established way back then, really focuses on that central goal: containment, keeping God's people present, maybe even numerous, but ultimately powerless, inoperable. The defeat in Egypt was a major setback for them, a triumph of God's plan, but the strategy of neutralization continued.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a final provocative thought to wrestle with. If this analysis holds, if the spiritual forces today are, in fact, content to let God's people exist as long as they remain inoperable, quiet, submissive, lacking real impact, then what specific actions or maybe what specific knowledge in your own life, in your community, would actually constitute the biggest spiritual disruption?
What would you need to learn, or what step would you need to take that would genuinely force the enemy to scramble and shift strategies again, maybe as dramatically as they supposedly did when Joseph, the intended victim, suddenly became the governor of all Egypt?
Something to think about. This long game of cosmic chess, as the source presents it, requires awareness.
Knowing the opponent's playbook, their timing, their preferred methods, it's the first step towards being truly effective, not just present.